Who Gets to Decide? A liberty-based podcast that brings a little piece of sanity to a confused society drowning in a culture of craziness. And here is your host, Seth Martin.
Well, all right. What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Who Gets to Decide. This is episode 644. I'm Seth Martin, your host. Thank you for joining me this evening. Glad you're here, and always happy you're listening. I ran across a video of Marjorie Taylor Greene, and this is post her resignation. As many of you know, she's not returning to Congress. She's not running for another term. She's leaving Congress. And there's been a lot of speculation as to why Marjorie Taylor Greene is leaving Congress. But one of the things I thought was interesting is her talk with Jillian Michaels, who has a program. And she was talking about how she didn't know anything about what to expect in Congress. And I thought of this graphic here that I have on the screen, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. You know, a lot of people, they talk about this. They'll talk about, well, if I was in Washington or if I was president or whatever, and they really don't understand the incentive structure around the government and what makes the government work. They envision, they believe somehow, and maybe some of you are like this, you know, somehow we believe that, oh, we can send a businessman to Congress or a businessman to the presidency and he'll fix the government. But the government is not a business, okay? The government doesn't work like a business. We all have this tendency to impose that way of thinking on the government, but it is far from a business. There's no way. There's a lot said negatively, mostly about profits and corporations' profits and things like this. But one of the best things about profits that nobody ever thinks about or never considers or never discusses with the public is that profits tell corporations what they're working on is valuable. Okay, that there are people willing to buy it. If you had something in your company that you were offering the public and nobody was buying it and you started taking losses, you would know that, oh, nobody wants this. I should stop doing it and repurpose my company to do something different, right? But the government doesn't have anything like that. It doesn't have any kind of feedback mechanism. Now, the people are supposed to be that feedback mechanism. But as we all know, that mechanism has been subverted. It's been broken. And she's going to talk a little bit about that today, about what actually happens in Congress and how this is a real problem. And so I think that's an interesting discussion. We're going to cover it today. And then also, I can't remember if I told you all this story or not, but years ago, it may have been 2020. No, it wasn't 2020. I think it was 2021. I went to the Libertarian National Convention. I was a delegate. And before that, I went to the Texas Libertarian Convention. And when you go to these conventions, they'll have these little tabletops set up where you can go talk to groups that are trying to align themselves with the Libertarian Party or any party for that matter that is doing a convention. And I was talking to these people that have an organization called Convention of the States. And so their idea is that eventually when all this, we can vote our way out of it and this kind of thing runs its course, people will call for a convention. And specifically the states do this, okay? The states call for a convention. This is constitutional. This is in, I forgot what, I should have looked up what article and section that's in, but it's in the Constitution that the states outside of Congress can call a convention of the states. And the states would send delegates to advocate on any changes to the Constitution that need to be made. And then those changes get recorded, and then the states then have to ratify it, and then it becomes an amendment or whatever, a new amendment, or maybe we get rid of some amendments or whatever. But you don't need Congress to do this. This is one of the little secrets, little hidden gems about the Constitution. The founders gave us a way to change the Constitution outside of Congress in case Congress became corrupted, which obviously they have. This is kind of the overarching topic today, but I want to acknowledge how many of our fellow citizens have this Mr. Smith goes to Washington idea of, representation, and how, we're there for our constituencies, and we're here to make changes, and we're here to improve, we're here to serve. You hear that a lot. We're here to serve the people. I'm using air fingers quotes. And this is mostly mythology that we carry about what our government does, how it operates, what it's supposed to do on our behalf, what it's not supposed to do on our behalf. There's a lot of mythology around that. And I just thought it was interesting because here's a sitting congresswoman, Marjorie Taylor Greene. She got elected to Congress and she was completely naive. I mean, she's going to tell you here in just a second how naive she was when she went to Congress and took on this role of representative. And I think a lot of good congressmen and women come to Congress just that way. And many of them aren't strong enough to resist the temptation of the money and power and things like that, and they end up giving in to some of these interest groups that she's going to talk about. So with that, let me pull up that interview, and there we go.
Here comes the black pill, and I'm sorry to be offering it. Here you go. It's Washington, Congress, and the Senate. Pretty much everyone elected, for the most part, would never vote for a bill like that because the people that donate to them would block it and tell them, do not vote for this. And this goes back to the world that everyone has gotten a peek look into through the Epstein files. The House and the Senate, on both sides of the aisle, most members of Congress and most senators are largely controlled by the richest donors in our country. And they're largely controlled by the lobbyists that represent the biggest industries in our country. And that is just a flat out fact. And once you are able to accept that, then it all starts to slowly fall into place. And that before I became a member of Congress, that wasn't something I understood. So just for you and your listening audience, I was extremely naive when I ran for Congress. I'm talking about I was the dumbest person on the planet. I genuinely believed that I could get elected and I could go to Washington and I could say, hey, we need to pass a balanced budget amendment because our debt is too much money. And I just believed that as a member of Congress, I could do things like that. Well, when I got here.
All right, real quick. First of all, let me tell you what black pill is, because a lot of you may not know what that is. So we've all seen The Matrix, the movie, or if you haven't, you should go see it. But the movie The Matrix, what happens is once they get Neo, they offer him the red pill or the blue pill. And the red pill basically does something to his body that disrupts who he thinks he believes he is, and shows him the Matrix, allows him to see the Matrix. And the blue pill it just puts him back in the Matrix. It just makes him forget everything and goes in. Now, since then, people have created these other categories, the white pill and the black pill. And the white pill is like the people that know there's a Matrix, they acknowledge the red, right? They've taken the red pill, but then the white pill tells them, oh, I'm optimistic about the future. I think the future is going to be very good, for XYZ. That's what the white pill says. It says you're optimistic. So you'll hear people say, I'm white pilled, I'm black pilled, I'm red pilled, things like that. Now the black pill is just the opposite, right? The black pill is like, this is never going to get better. It's never going to improve. It's just the way it is, and there's nothing we can do about it. And they have all the power, they have all the guns, they have all the money, and they have all the jail cells and the ability to throw us all in jail if we don't like it. And so that's the black pill position. So she's kind of setting Jillian Michaels up here with the black pill expectation. Now, the way I started off this meeting or this show was to talk to you about how it's like Mr. Smith goes to Washington. Can't you just hear that in her voice? You know, like when I went to Congress, I didn't know any of this stuff. I just thought I could go up there and pass a bill, you know, sponsor a bill and get it passed. And I just thought that's how it was. And so you could just hear the naivety in her voice. And I think, look, I mean, to be honest, I think a lot of citizens, a lot of our fellow citizens are this way. They think, oh, I can vote for somebody I want and I'll get change. You know, when Barack Obama got elected, you know, his whole tagline was change you could believe in. Now, looking back, we can clearly see that Barack Obama didn't do anything that would change America for the better, but that's how he ran, and people bought into that, right? People, it makes their hearts swoon, and it gives them, you know, it makes their voices soar for America and makes us feel like patriotic and like we're the most awesome of the most awesomest countries in the world and stuff. But the truth is, we're just as corrupt as every other government. Governments are just that way. They're not businesses. They can't be run like a business. They power, you know, everybody's heard the saying, power corrupts and ultimate power corrupts ultimately, right? So this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with power, influence, money, corruption. That's government. Those are the features of government. Now, what's interesting is people like Bernie Sanders will talk about all the wonderful things that government can do, and he'll malign corporations. Corporations are greedy and and everybody should have free health care and the government can provide that. No, the government doesn't provide anything. All the government can do is steal from somebody that has something and transfer it to somebody that doesn't have something. And that's essentially what government does. And stealing is, of course, force and violence, and it's not the same thing as a market. In fact, let me just real quick, just to juxtapose the two. You know, I was thinking about this the other day. When I was in college, I took a political science class at Texas A&M, and they made us read a book called Zero Sum Society. I'll never forget this. The reason I haven't forgotten this is because I felt like my professor was a communist or something. Anyway, so I remember this book that we read. And later on, when I got into economics and I understood that, no, you know, a business, and this applies to an individual as well, but a business doesn't, you know, there's no arsenal inside of a business that runs around forcing customers to buy things. That's not how business works, right? Business is you come in, you present some solution to a problem. The customer sits on the other side of the table and they try to evaluate how much value that particular solution could bring to their business. And they weigh the costs and they either buy or they don't buy. That's it. That's all a business is. And to the extent a business has something that a lot of customers want, well, then they're going to make a lot of money. They're going to have a lot of revenue and they're going to make margin. They're going to make profit on what they produce. And so when you analyze, you know, like a transaction between two businesses or two individuals, let's just take a candy bar as an example. So if I go to the store and I have money in my wallet and I buy a Snickers bar, and let's just say for argument's sake, the Snickers bar costs $2 and I have $2 in my pocket. This is a win-win transaction because what's happening there is I actually value the Snickers bar more than I value the $2 in my wallet. And the store values the $2 in my wallet more than they value the Snickers bar. So a transaction happens. So notice that's a win-win. Okay, that's not a win-lose. That's not like when you know, we're coming up on tax season here and you have to pay your taxes to the IRS. They say it's voluntary, but is it really? Would people really volunteer to turn over, you know, a third of their income to the government, especially when they're not happy with what the government's doing? No, it's not voluntary. What's on the other side of that transaction is the threat of going to prison, okay? Or the IRS coming with their armed police that look like ICE, kicking in your door and arresting you, or going through your stuff and accidentally shooting your dog if you're lucky, or maybe shooting one of your family members if you're unlucky. So these are very different kinds of things. Going and buying a Snickers bar and voluntarily pulling money out of my wallet and giving it to a store, and the store voluntarily giving me the Snickers bar and taking my money, that is a sign of a healthy society, okay? And the sign of an unhealthy society is police running around, aiming their guns at citizens, forcing them to do things that they don't want to do. That's an unhealthy society, okay? And so when we're talking about government and government being force, that's the tool they use. There is no voluntary action between you and government. There's only involuntary action. And the theory behind all this, what we've been sold, if you will, is that there are some areas where the government must use force because the free market won't work or whatever. And the reality is we don't actually know that to be true. In fact, many people have shown that not to be true. But what the government tends to do is it tends to just take over areas, right? I mean, if a school system starts in a town and they see that, 15% of the population is not getting educated, what they do is they come in and they take over the whole thing, even the 85% that are getting educated. And they say, see, because you can't educate this 15%, we have to take over the whole 85 plus the 15. And that's the way government typically does. See, because 5% of our population doesn't have health care insurance, we have to take over the whole thing so that 5% can get health care insurance. And what they do then is the health care insurance is subsidized. It costs a lot of money. It doesn't cover anything. And everybody's unhappy anyway. And this is pretty much the way the government works. And there's nothing you can do about it. Once they do it, there's nothing you can do to undo it, because now these interests build up around it, which is kind of what Marjorie Taylor Greene is talking about. She's talking about how the lobbyists and all the interest just make it impossible to change anything or to do anything. Everybody's got, some interest in keeping a program in place. So the way that happens, just technically, is let's say there's a budget for $100 million for a program, okay? Doesn't even matter what the program is. What happens in the reality of government is interest groups build up around that, and they consolidate, and in their mind, they can spend $99 million, okay, ensuring that the program stays in place for a $100 million program. They still get $1 million. These are concentrated benefits. That $100 million goes into the hands of a very small group of people. And the costs are diffuse. You're spending that $100 million over 300 million Americans. So most Americans are not going to go protest that. I mean, if you do the math on that, it's not very much money. It's 30 cents a piece or something. So you're not going to go protest that, but the benefits are very concentrated. So the groups that benefit from all that are very motivated, and they'll spend up to $99 million to protect a $100 million program. So that's why that's so hard to dislodge. And this is what Marjorie Taylor Greene is talking about. All right, let's continue here. Good talk, by the way, on this one.
I found out. Oh no, it doesn't work that way. Sorry, Marjorie. You are dumb. You've realized you got to learn the ways of Washington, and there is very much an agenda in place, and there are controlling industries and controlling donors, no matter who is in charge. That's why a lot of the spending and appropriation bills look very similar in many ways, with just some arguments on each side with like social issues or certain different political agenda issues. But when you boil them all down, they fund all the same stuff. Basically, the basic funding components fund the military industrial complex, they fund big pharma, they give out the NGO, and they give out the government contracts, and it will do that no matter which party's in charge. And somebody like me can't stop it. And so the hard reality that I have to tell you and people that are watching is you cannot vote your way out of this. It is not going to change. It will not change.
Okay. So let's stop right there for a second. Yeah. I mean, where have you heard that before, right? Oh, yeah, on who gets to decide. That's what Seth has been telling me. You cannot vote your way out of this. The dirty little secret, really, about our political system, our government, is it was designed, this type of government was designed to do a handful of things. That's it. Okay? Just a handful. And the problem is it's expanded to the point where it does way too many things and costs way too much money. And there's a crowding out effect, as the government gets larger, your life, your standard of living, your prosperity necessarily gets smaller. Okay? That's just math. There's only so many resources. There's only so much to go around. And if more and more of what there is to go around has to be rinsed through Washington, D.C., that means less for everybody. There's a company called Interactive Brokers, and they used to have these commercials, and the founder was on there, and he's like Hungarian or something, and he says, look, it is true, like the rich get richer all the time, right? But if you punish the rich, yes, the rich do feel that, right? They get poorer, relatively speaking. They have their standard of living. If the government comes in and does something to the rich as a group, then as a group, their power, their standard of living, whatever they used to do, they can do less now, right? But what happens is, when you analyze that, what you see is that it actually has the downward effect is on everybody. So when you go harm one group because it has the money, what ends up happening is all groups suffer, all become poor. Now, it may just be marginally poor, right? But everybody gets poor. And so this is kind of the effect that the government has. As the government gets bigger, now that's not happening with the rich, but because they're part of it. And you'll see here in a minute, I'm going to go back to that Convention of the States story, and we're going to tie a bow around that. But as the government gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's all it's ever done, right? I mean, since I've been alive, all the government's done is get bigger. Okay. It doesn't, I mean, it's just bigger all the time. So that has a negative impact on all of our lives. Even the rich, really. The rich as they are, would actually be richer if the government were smaller. We see this during the 1880s and 1890s. The amount of wealth that was created by the wealthiest people in America is just, it's unfathomable. I remember one time we went to the gosh, what's that house called in Asheville, North Carolina? I'm just drawing a blank. But we went to that house, and this house was built by it was one of the grandsons of Vanderbilt. Okay, so I think Cornelius Vanderbilt was the guy that created all the wealth in the country through steamships and railroads and things like this. And this big house, go look it up. It's in Asheville, North Carolina. It's an amazing piece of real estate. I mean, it's unbelievable. And Cornelius Vanderbilt had so much wealth that his grandson was wealthy enough to build that. I mean, that is extraordinary. You just can't even hardly imagine how much wealth was created during the Gilded Age. And now you'll hear people say, "Oh, well, those are the robber barons and whatever." No. These people built businesses at a time when people had nothing, and it just created so much prosperity and so much demand that they just became fabulously wealthy. It's not like wealthy today. It's a different kind of wealth. Wealthy today is connectedness to government. It's different. It's not the same, and it's not as much. Even as wealthy as some people are, it's not as much. Nobody alive today has as much as Cornelius Vanderbilt had. Okay? Nobody alive today has as much as John D. Rockefeller had. These guys were wealthy on a whole nother level. Okay? Anyway, forgot why I got off on that tangent, but I think it's just interesting to see that Marjorie Taylor Greene, Marjorie Taylor Greene has observed this on a level that most of us will never see. And I just thought it was instructive to kind of validate what I tell you here on this show all the time, that this process is broken in a way that voting, I don't care if you vote for Donald Trump or if you vote for Kamala Harris, it doesn't matter who you vote for. It's not changing. There's nothing is going to change in Washington, D.C. And I just think it's interesting that a person that was from in Washington, D.C. is telling you that, okay? But you could just, average people can observe that. But it's interesting how much people still rely on Democrat, Republican. They get into the politics, and I'm around it all the time. Republicans will say, well, if we can just get all the Democrats out of there. No, that's not going to do anything. And the quicker we all get together and decide that, the quicker we can get on with getting rid of all the rot and getting back to some sort of legitimate system that works. All right, let's continue.
No matter, people can be mad this time, say they're mad at Republicans for XYZ, whatever it may be, and they get Democrats in there to control the House and Senate or whatever. Nothing's really going to change. You're still going to get most of the same effects. And say if you're a Republican voter and you just, like me, was very much against the 4 years of the Biden administration, you're like, oh, heck no, we're not going back to that. We're going to fight to Republicans keep the House and the Senate. Guess what? We're still going to get a lot of the same results. And when you get someone in, I got in, I was not supported by anybody. As a matter of fact, I had like 36 Republican members of Congress were donating to my opponent when I first ran for Congress in 2020. Every Republican state legislature, except 2 in my district, were for my opponent. I mean, I had the whole Republican establishment against me. And then when I got in there, I was fighting my own party just as much as I was fighting Democrats. And I'll use Thomas Massie, who I love Thomas Massie, as an example. Everybody's fighting Thomas Massie right now.
I see it.
And it's terrible. But there's only a rare few that are actually representing their district and actually trying to do the right thing. And those are the people that the entire Washington establishment destroys.
Okay. Yeah, no, there's just no disputing anything she's talking about. The one thing I wanted to bring up is she's right. I mean, there's no finding any fault in what she said. Now, one of the things I wanted to say is she kind of touched on it. She said, it doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat, or if the Republicans get the House or the Democrats get the House, pretty much all the same stuff happens. And I've said that before on this program. On all the important things, okay, well, Seth, what are the important things? Okay, the monetary system, the money. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. Neither party is advocating for the abolishment of the fiat money system, okay, and going to gold. That's not happening. It doesn't matter if you vote Republican or Democrat, you're still going to have the fiat money system. The industrial military complex. Nobody is ending wars, okay? We tried to get that with Donald Trump. He ran on that. But notice we're about to go to war, it looks like, with Iran. And he's bombed Iran. And we've invaded Venezuela. And there's, in one sense, I know this isn't the most patriotic thing to say, but in one sense, we're like the pariah of the world, okay? We're the country that is like, we're like the busybody country of the world. We're into everybody else's business, and we think they should do it our way. And if you don't do it our way, we're going to bomb you. We're going to take you out of the SWIFT system. We're going to give you sanctions. We're going to do something to make your life miserable, right? And so in a lot of ways, we're becoming the pariah of the world. And it doesn't matter if you vote Republican or Democrat. That never changes. There's several things that are like this, okay? I mean, there's about 7 or 8 things that no matter who you vote for, you're going to get. You're going to get the foreign policy that you're going to get. You're going to get a foreign policy that says Russia is evil and we can't trust anything that they say. China is wanting to take over the world. The foreign policy it's the same no matter which president is in there, which party member rules the House or the Senate. It just doesn't matter. And so in a very real sense, it doesn't matter who you vote for. Now, with the caveat of saying, I think we would be worse off if we had Kamala Harris, okay, as president. You have to remember, to the president, the power of the presidency has expanded dramatically over the last 200 plus years. It was never meant to be that way. And so that's why a lot of people call it the imperial presidency. So we can't have a complete imbecile in the White House, okay? And that's exactly what Kamala Harris is. She's a complete imbecile. Now, Trump's not much better, but at least he's not a complete imbecile. Yeah, I mean, we could spend a whole show on the problems with our political system and electing people, and just it's just screwed up, right? But what I want to do is I want to shift the subject to something related. I mentioned earlier, I was talking to you about the Convention of the States. And so during the Texas Libertarian Convention, I was talking to these guys, and I was like, well, what do you guys do? You know, what's your organization do? And they explained that they basically are formulating amendments, and they're doing advocacy work as well. But one of the things they do is they want to have amendments kind of teed up and ready to go in the states in case there's ever a convention of the states. They want to have some dialogue about these proposed amendments, instead of just bringing them up cold on the floor of the convention. You know, they want to basically have a list of these amendments, these proposed amendments. And so I asked him, I said, well, what are some of these amendments? And he said, well, you know, balanced budget amendment, a term limits amendment. And I said, yeah, those are good, but they're not going to fix anything. And he's like, well, why do you say that? You know, and I'm like, I'll explain to him why I said that it wouldn't fix anything. And it's basically what Marjorie Taylor Greene's talking about. So this is something I've been thinking a lot about, and I want to share with you guys today that I created an amendment to the Constitution. And I've contacted the Convention of the States organization, and I've notified them that I have this amendment, and I think I actually submitted it. And I'm waiting to hear back from them to talk to them about it. And I wanted to share it with you guys here because, look, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know if this will be a good amendment or not. You know, I just don't know. But I thought it's at least a good start, and certainly somebody liberty-minded that's a lawyer could probably improve it. But I just want to share some of the language with you guys on the program, and I'm curious to see what you think. You know, comment back on the show and let me know what your thoughts are. But the amendment it says proposed amendment, the Integrity of Representation and Sovereignty Act. So right off the bat, we have a title that actually means what the amendment's purpose is. I mean, you know, like when you have the Affordable Health Care Act, most things that Congress come up with are just the opposite of what they name it. But the intention here is to name it, you know, what it actually accomplishes. So there's 3 sections to this amendment, and let me just read these to you, and we'll talk a little bit about them as we move through here. All right, Section 1, the scope of redress. The right of and some of this is from the Constitution itself. It just references other parts of the Constitution. It says, the right of the people to petition the government for redress of grievances shall be exercised solely for the advancement of individual liberty and the protection of private property rights of citizens of the United States. No person, agent, or entity shall engage in advocacy to the legislative or executive branches for any purpose outside these enumerated protections. So essentially, what this paragraph says, just high level, it says that if you're going to lobby Congress or the executive branch, you must do so for the purposes of liberty and the protection of private property rights. You can have no other reason, okay? Any other reason that you try to lobby Congress or the executive branch other than liberty and property rights will be unconstitutional, and you'll be in violation of the law. That's basically what that says. All right, Section 2, prohibition of private interest and foreign influence. This section says, Congress shall make no law and no public official shall receive any petition intended to secure special privilege, financial gain, or consolidated power for any specific individual, corporation, association, or political organization. In a nutshell, what this says is if you're a corporation or an individual, you cannot go lobby Congress or the executive branch for any special privilege in the marketplace. Okay? Congress shall make no law that privileges your corporation, that privileges you as an individual, that privileges any organization, NGO, anything. Okay? The only thing you can go petition Congress for is liberty in general for the individuals of the United States of America. That's the purpose of this prohibition. So it breaks down into three parts. Prohibition of favor, the granting of subsidies, monopolies, or exclusive legal privileges through lobbying is strictly prohibited. Foreign influence, all lobbying activities by or on behalf of non-citizens, foreign entities, or foreign governments are hereby prohibited. Penalty, violation of this section shall be deemed a high crime, resulting in immediate forfeiture of office and permanent disqualification from the public trust. So you're booted out of office and you can never come back. I don't think that's a problem. High crimes, you might recognize that term. Impeachment, you can be impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors. And of course, that's subjective, but the idea is to make this more objective, right? So it's less subjective. People could say, well, according to the, I don't know what amendment we're on, 32nd Amendment, this person should have to leave office. All right, Section 3, the legislative purpose. The legislative power herein granted is vested in a Congress whose primary mandate is the safeguard of liberties and property of the several states and the citizens thereof. I mean, I don't know how you can be more succinct than that. The legislative power herein granted is vested in a Congress whose primary mandate is the safeguard of liberties and property and the several states and the citizens thereof. I don't know if y'all remember, but in The Law by Frederick Bastiat, I've talked to you before about how Bastiat said that the purpose of the law was to protect liberty and property. And anytime you do something other than protect liberty and property with the law, you get a perversion of the law. And he said when you get a perversion of the law, what happens is that you either the few plunder the many, okay, so a handful of people plunder all of us, or everybody plunders everybody. And to me, this is exactly what has happened in the United States of America. We started by perverting the law. Okay, so we perverted the law to favor, individual gain or corporate gain or group gain or whatever at the expense of everybody else. And so that perversion has led to this situation where it used to be, I mean, I think it's always been this way, but it used to be that just a handful of people were plundering us. And so the numbers weren't so big, right? You could plunder, I could plunder 300 million people. I could steal 50 cents from everybody and I could be fabulously wealthy. But if everybody's plundering everybody, that means that everybody has to be getting something of value, and 50 cents from each other is not a value. You'd have to be getting hundreds or thousands of dollars. And so it just grows. The magnification of this few plunder the many just grows dramatically. And I think that's where we are today. We're basically, everybody's trying to live at the expense of their neighbor. They want what they want, but they want somebody else to pay for it. And I think that's where we are today. All right, Section 4. This is an important section because part of the problem in the Constitution is there's not much remedy. Okay, if anybody violates the Constitution, the Supreme Court says, "Hey, you got to stop doing that," and they stop doing that. But there's not really a remedy. There's not really any kind of punishment or provision that deals with what happens when you violate this particular provision. So that's what this section follows, and it also has to do with less reliance on the Supreme Court, because if 9 people say something is constitutional, even if all the 50 states say it's not, the problem is the Supreme Court said it was. And this is just, to me, is just absurd. We shouldn't have anything like this. So the state nullification trigger is something I came up with, and maybe there's a better way to do this, but this is just something I came up with. Any law, act, or provision passed by Congress may be challenged by the Attorney General of any state. Okay, this is very important. Any state. Part 1, the declaration. Upon a formal declaration of challenge by one state Attorney General, joined by the formal declarations of 9 additional states' Attorneys General, the challenged act of Congress shall be immediately nullified. Okay, so immediately, like we don't have to go vote on it or anything like that. If an Attorney General says, it's kind of like saying, I want to create a motion and somebody seconds it. Okay, it's almost like a process like that. Like one Attorney General says, hey, this is unconstitutional, and he's joined by 9 additional Attorneys Generals. That's it. The law is unconstitutional. It's nullified. Okay, Congress might as well just, strike through the whole thing. Okay, second part, effective nullification. Such nullified acts shall be void, and this is a Latin term, I don't know, ab initio, possessing no legal authority, and the federal government is strictly prohibited from exercising any force, penalty, or administrative power to compel compliance with said act. So this is my amendment to the Constitution. It's called the Integrity of Representation and Sovereignty Act. I'm hoping the Convention of the States will take it up. I'm hoping there's an attorney that is knowledgeable about constitutional law and might get interested in fine-tuning it. But this is kind of what I came up with. And like I said, I've been thinking about this for a long time. I even asked my dad to help me. How would you say it? How would you do this? And he's not interested in that kind of stuff. He says, well, the short way is the best way. But then I thought about it. I thought, that's not really true, because the First Amendment, I don't know, it doesn't get any shorter than the First Amendment, right? That Congress shall make no law abridging speech. But yet, man, it's constantly being challenged. I mean, right now it's being challenged with misinformation and disinformation. And so I just thought, it might need to have, now 1 page is good. Let me just say that. I mean, every amendment should be like 1 page. We shouldn't have this, these amendments that just go on and on and on for pages and pages, just like we shouldn't have laws like that. You have a good law when it's like, thou shalt not murder. It's 1 sentence. Nobody is confused about that. Nobody tries to argue against it. Nobody says, I think murder is actually a good thing. Nobody ever says that. I've never heard anybody say that. And so it's just obvious, right? You shouldn't murder other human beings. They have a right to life, just like you have a right to life. And yet some of our quote unquote more modern laws are like thousands of pages. And I just don't think they should be that way. They should be very, very short. Certainly 1 page. If you need more than 1 page to say what it is you're trying to say, then you're not the right person to say it. We need to go find somebody else to say it. That's kind of the way I feel about that. All right, everybody. I guess I'm about done. I just, this Marjorie Taylor Greene thing, I'm really disappointed that she's giving up. But at the same time, I understand. I mean, she's frustrated with the process. Why do I want to waste the rest of my life screwing around with these imbeciles up here? I mean, I think that's probably the way she looks at it. She's like, I could be with my family. I could be doing fun things and traveling and going and seeing things and doing things. I don't need to hang out with these crooks. I mean, that's essentially what they are. And so she resigned, and I respect her a lot for that. She's not going to get much money as a result. I think she's going to get maybe a couple $1,000s a month for the rest of her life. Big deal. So I'm happy for Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'm glad she's speaking out, and she's not moving away from the spotlight entirely. She's going to continue to speak out about things that she feels passionately about. In fact, I might try to reach out to her and see if I can get her help with this amendment idea. Because I think, again, we always talk about this on the program. One of the things engineering really helped me learn, and I'm not an engineer, I'm never going to be a great engineer or anything like that. But one of the things that helps you learn is that there's this direct relationship between problem and solution, right? You cannot solve problems if you don't understand the problem. There are no solutions where there is no understanding of the problem. And so a lot of what I talk about on this show is I feel like I'm trying to reveal what I think is the problem. And I could be wrong, okay? Just to stipulate, what I see as a particular problem might not be the right problem at all. I think I'm closer to identifying our political problems than 99% of the people I listen to on, TV or whatever. I mean, one of the reasons I started this show is because I didn't think people clearly understood the problem and communicated it. And I don't know, if we're going to be serious about the United States lasting for another 250 years, which it might not. I mean, it might dissolve, and I would be okay with that as long as it dissolved, peacefully. I'm not interested in another civil war or something like that. But if the United States government is just going to let Texas leave and New Mexico leave and Louisiana leave and Oklahoma leave and just New York leave and California leave and so on and so forth, if they're just going to let that happen, then I'm okay with that. I think that's fine. And I think we could bring something like the Articles of Confederation back to essentially have a treaty among each other that, again, makes trade regular. Okay. We all agree not to charge each other tariffs and things like that. And we can travel freely between each of the states and things like that. And maybe we all decide to use gold in trade or something. I'm okay with all that. But if we're going to stay the United States of America, it has to change, because the way it is now is not going to last, for one thing. And for another thing, I'm really concerned about America being perceived the pariah of the world. And I'm really worried that eventually, maybe not in my lifetime, but maybe in my children's lifetime, that all the guns are going to be aimed at America. And America is going to be like Germany was in the 20th century. Everybody's going to gang up on America. And I think that's a very dangerous situation for our people and our posterity. And I don't want to see that happen in America. I would rather see America break up into 50 states or 6 or 8 regions or something like that than have the entire world's guns aimed at America, because America has overstepped its privileges. And these are privileges I'm talking about. The U.S. dollar is the reserve currency, the world looking upon us as the world's police. These are privileges. And I think we've overstayed our welcome in those areas. I think we've overreached in a big way. And we clearly have on the money. If you want to argue that we haven't on the police, I think it's arguable. But I don't think the money part of it is even arguable. I think there's just no way to argue that. I mean, people send us goods and services, and we send them money, okay? Fiat money that's not worth anything. And so they're sending us something that they had to put real work into, real productive effort into. And we send them, in return, stuff that just comes off a printing press by hitting a button. That could go away tomorrow. I mean, that's how fleeting that is. And I think if you're going to be a great people, you can't be built on something so fleeting and so corrupt as that. So with that, I think I'm going to wrap up the show. Thank you guys for coming in. Thanks for listening. Thanks for continuing to listen and come into the show and share the show. For those of you that listen on your podcatcher, try to go get an episode on YouTube and hit the like and subscribe button. See if we can get YouTube doing a little work for us. But come back and listen, because at the end of the day, that's what's most important, is that we're talking with one another. And comment. If you want to comment on my amendment and let me know what you think about it, I'd love to hear from you. I've thought about this a lot. Bastiat was a big influence on me. And so there's a reason the law has been perverted in the way it has. It's so that these politicians can make lots of money and be millionaires and graft off the system. And, with these NGOs, they just keep coming up with more and more creative ways to grift the rest out of us out of our hard-earned money. And I just, I'm tired of it. Like a lot of you, I'm tired of it. I want it to stop, but there's no good way to stop it with our current system. And so it's going to have to change. And I think if we're going to stay America, then maybe the Convention of the States way is ultimately where we end up, because ultimately people are always coming to my side of the aisle, the side of the aisle that says Republican and Democrat is the party that you select is not the solution. Voting is not the solution. You hear Marjorie Taylor Greene say that. So slowly but surely people are going to come to my side. And I think ultimately the remedy has to be some sort of convention of the states where we tell Washington, D.C. to stay home. Hey, you guys just stay home. In fact, you're fired. Go away. We're going to completely remove you. That's part of what we're going to do in this convention, is completely remove everybody from government and install a new government. And then, oh, by the way, we're going to put some guardrails on this thing so that you can't do what you've been doing. And maybe we even get rid of some amendments. I've advocated for getting rid of the 16th Amendment, the 17th Amendment. The 16th Amendment is the income tax amendment. The 17th Amendment is the one where senators became popularly elected as opposed to being appointed by state legislatures. I think we should go back to appointing the Senate by the state legislatures, because that gives the states representation in our system of government. And they haven't had that for years. And that's a big part of the problem. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for listening. Come back in a couple days. We'll have a new show for you on Who Gets to Decide. Peace.